Hello. So today I'd like to look at reductionism and holism. And first of all, I want to kind of get your head around something to start off with. So I've got a little exercise to start here. So just close your eyes, and I want you to think about a pen. Okay. So particularly your pen that you are using on there. Just have a look at it, and once you've looked at all of it, close your eyes and form that mental picture of it. Okay. Now I want you to think about 10 pens. Okay, so I want you to hold in your mind the concept of 10 separate, unique, individual pens. Then let's push that to 1,000. 1,000 pens. Can you think of 1,000 pens? Can you think of 10,000 pens? Can you think of 100,000 pens? Can you think of 1,000,000 pens? Can you really? Can you really think of a million pens? If you can, I'm very, very impressed with you. However, we tend to kind of see it as masses. We don't individually conceptualize each and every pen because we can't. There's so mammoth is the task of doing that we just can't look at and consider every single pen, every single thing, even though it's a fairly straightforward thing. We're so familiar with it. And that gives us a bit of a problem. So we are trying to understand everything all at once, but we can understand the single pen, but we can't really understand the million pens. So the idea of if we break it down, just look at one, and maybe we can build it up. We can build up a gradual understanding. I've got another one for you here. Okay, I'd like you to click on the link which I put in the video below. So I've put the link for this little video here, and it's a classic story, and it's animated and done really nicely. So can you have a listen to the story of the elephant? Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that. And what do we see? Well, we saw the fact that each blind man could only perceive the part of the elephant which they touched. They only had an idea of an understanding of the area in which they themselves were working with. And it meant that they failed to conceive the whole elephant. They failed to truly understand what an elephant is. And the two exercises that we've done, this links in with two standpoints in psychology, whether we go for holism or whether we go for reductionism. At different times, we might use the term levels of explanations as well, working through these things. So I've got that on there as well. But we also might hear people say, oh, the overly reductionist. That's a criticism. But being reductionist is not. The key word in that overly reductionist is overly. So we need to understand the whole issue around this holism versus reductionism debate. Why is it relevant? Why is it important? Let's get into it. So first of all, there was a whole school of psychologists called Gestalt scientists or Gestalt psychologists. Now, again, we don't even cover them now, but it's they had this belief that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that kind of makes sense because if you think about it, the body, which is bone, flesh, fat, muscles, nerves, veins, and bodily fluids, none of which is truly exceptional, none of which is intelligent or remarkable on its own, none of which achieves much on its own. Yet it was what makes every single great person out of history, Einstein, Alexander the Great, Caesar, the famous people whose names are ringing history. They were all made of flesh and bone and blood and fats and muscles and nerves and veins and bodily fluids. But they were more than the sum of their parts. Just as the image below indicates, if you were to take any one part of a bike it's not really very effective. It doesn't really do much. And if you were to come across it separately, you might not necessarily understand where it goes unless you've seen a bike, unless you understand it. And when you put it all together, it works all in harmony. And as such, we have that easier form of transportation than your feet. And you can travel much further on a bike than you can on your feet in a day. So, what is reductionism? Reductionism is the belief that human behavior can be explained by breaking down the simpler component parts. So those who take a reductionist position believe that the best way to understand behavior is to look closely at the parts that make up our systems. And by doing so, we can then gradually build up our understanding. So reductionism is based upon the scientific assumption of what's called parsimony, the idea that complex phenomenon should be explained in the simplest of its forms. You probably heard of Occam's razor, or if not, it's the idea that the simplest answer is normally the correct answer. Yeah, the simplest way to solve a problem is normally the best. So parsimony is kind of a similar idea to that, but it's the idea that our theories should be as simple and straightforward as possible. So the working memory is part of a model for our understanding of memory, and that's really relevant and really important, but it needs to be straightforward. It needs to be simple. The holistic approach, however, rather than breaking things down like the reductionists would choose to do, instead they argue that you must always look at the whole picture, the complicated picture that is the whole person, and you must treat the whole person, and you must engage the whole person. So, of course, which approach are going along with it and saying, oh, we must be holistic? It's the humanists. Everybody else is reductionist. Only the humanists are following this line. But I gotta say, I kind of get where they're coming from, which, kind of upsets me. So, for example, understanding depression, it's not just about recognizing that there's a chemical imbalance or that there is a lack of sensitivity to a particular neurotransmitter, etc. Instead, it's about recognizing that the different elements of people's lives that make up people's experience and shape them there, this affects them. So, their relationship status, their employment status, their health, their opportunities, whether they're moving towards self-actualization, all these sorts of things are going to be relevant when considering someone with depression. And it's not just chemical imbalances. And so taking a holistic approach to treatment will result in a better outcome. And actually, when we look at some of the best treatment centers and best things there, they do take a much more holistic approach with life coaching as well as counseling and also medicalized treatment plans being used in combination. And we see some of the very best outcomes coming from a very, very, very holistic approach being taken on there. And it's all based upon the idea of understanding the whole, and that by understanding the whole, we can actually understand it much more effectively. By avoiding reducing things to some of their parts, we actually understand how things all come together. So when we look, for instance, back at the multi-store model memory and working memory model, we see that, yeah, okay, that's great. We can understand how memory comes in there, but we don't understand the role in which emotion plays in our memory. And we know that emotion plays a role. We've known it since flashbulb memory was discovered, where we basically found that people remember hugely emotional events and they tend to stick in your mind. So we know there's a connection, but the models which we used beforehand are problematic and lack that level of coverage because they don't incorporate emotion. Alan Badley's working on that element now, but you know what? The holistic approach would say that actually we should always have considered the role of emotion when we were looking at memory right from the get-go. Reductionists argue that we need to break it down to understand each little bit and build up a picture, but holistics say we should have been looking at it all together, all along. So, particularly the humanists, we also have a little bit of cognitive, a little bit of psychodynamic approach, take this more into account, although I wouldn't say they're truly holistic on there. I would say they take a little bit more into account on there. So when we take a look at the explanation the cognitive approach gives us for schizophrenia, we can see that it recognizes the role of biological factors as well as cognitive factors there. So I think that's really relevant there. And also psychodynamic kind of talks about inherited ones there, but also the way in which the environment affects and all those things there. So actually, the psychodynamic does kind of also fit into this a little bit. It's more holistic than we necessarily initially think. Right, evaluation holistic approach. Okay, so the benefit to understand the whole is undisputably valuable. Often the fact that we are striving to form our hypothesis and this is what we're trying to actually understand. We're trying to understand the whole human being, the whole human experience on these things. Yet we end up, due to the limitations of the methodology of creating specific, highly focused hypotheses, we are unable to engage with this. And we end up with this reductionist approach to carrying out research. Whereas the holistic approach doesn't suffer from that and seeks to restore the balance and has less methodological limitations because of that. We can also use research such as the example of Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiments. It is a very, very complex set of interactions in which Zimbardo spent years analyzing. He wrote his book, which there's a copy, of course, in the library, The Lucifer Effect, and great book, worth reading. But it takes an entire book for him to explain his study, not just a paper, because he looks at the complex interactions between all of the participants, not just individual responses in isolation. So he looks at it, the connection between the different guards, different leadership roles that people took in those. There's always 3 guards on shift. And as there's 3 guards on shift, you tend to get one person who becomes the leader, one person who's kind of the second, who kind of both eggs on and sort of also is kind of slightly competitive for leadership role with the leader, and as such that fuels that progressively problematic treatment of prisoners. But you also have, in every single set, you have the guy who is just there to do the job. He's just there to do it. And actually, at any point that things are calmed down or de-escalated or things like that, you keep on finding it tends to be the same guy in each set of prison guards. It's a really interesting phenomenon to look at, the fact that actually there were many who just sought to do the job. But by understanding the depth of the situation and carrying out this holistic evaluation in which we consider all the aspects of the situation and all the connections there, we gain a much better understanding of the area being studied. So taking a holistic approach and when we analyze results is actually more useful to us in the long run. However, this means that we are unable to consider detail effectively. Going back to our little pen exercise, remember you could conceptualize the pen at the start, you could conceptualize that and say, oh yeah, this is one pen, I got it clear. By the time you get into 10, it's getting a little bit harder. By the time you get into the thousands, it's almost impossible to consider each individual. Just looking at larger things there. A million, it is impossible. Yeah, you lose all the depth and the detail. Um, and so by being holistic, by trying to take into account everything, we are actually losing our ability to engage with everything. So that's really important. We need that. When it comes to usable theories that can be used to help people progress, often the theories produced by the holistic approach remain too complicated to produce effective plans of action, such as treatment programs. So, for example, the person who devised a holistic based treatment may be able to use their holistic research to develop effective treatments for things such as OCD. So, again, probably going to be a humanist who doing this. And Rogers, clients in therapy, Rogers was an incredibly effective clinician and very powerful there. Yet when it comes to teaching others that method, it's so hugely complicated. It's so multifactorial and varied that the ability to pass on that level of complexity and understanding to others so that they can then use it, well, unfortunately, it normally fails. And this is the thing of kind of why a lot of humanist treatment sort of died out, because simply put, it takes so long to become good at it that most people stop. It's too complex. And that is problematic. Yeah. If we are to understand the human experience, we need to do it in a timely fashion in order to be able to use it. But when we look at the holistic approach, that is not always possible. So the key to implementing our understanding effectively is that we end up having to break things down, make it manageable. There's a reason why all the other sciences don't have a unified single theory. And this again comes back to this, that in psychology, we have no unified single theory. And the reason for that is that even if we did manage to somehow reach agreement on it, it would be too big, too unwieldy to actually use. So let's look at the reductionist. So we did the pen things, work on that. So we're able to understand each single pen, and we can gradually build it up. That's kind of the idea of what reductionists are doing. Reductionist looks at the individual elements of a situation in order to build up detailed understanding of what is occurring. For example, we can look at memory. Yeah, this is very, very reductionist. I've mentioned it a little bit already. We can look at information coming in from our senses, and we can then consider the other elements gradually. We can work it through, we can build it up on these things there. By doing this, we can gain a detailed understanding of it. Another example is Milgram. Milgram, he looked specifically at situation as a factor, and then he looked at the different elements within there. Using his variations, he gradually added onto his knowledge on his original study using his variations, just as Ash did as well as his variations, and both of them came up with a overall theory later on. But the key thing was that they gradually built that theory piece by piece, piecing it together in order to complete the theory. Just kind of like you building a wall from Lego bricks, as we see there. It's about gradually piecing together the puzzle. And this is what the reductionist approach tries to do. It tries to build it from the bottom up. When we look at forensic psychology, we particularly see that we have a holistic approach versus a reductionist approach being used for our American top-down processing compared with our British geographical and bottom-up data-driven based approach. Okay, so that's really relevant and useful for us to bear in mind as we go through. Because remember, the great thing about this topic is it can boost our knowledge of and understanding of past topics, but also we can use it in ones that are upcoming. So, evaluation of this. Look, the majority of all scientific research and theories created and founded upon this approach. From physics to psychology, there is no unified theory for everything, partly because to understand everything would take too long. It would require too much mental space to even process or conceptualize it, more than we have. Yet we don't need to always understand absolutely everything in order to understand why people are acting strangely in one way, or why some people can remember 6 items while other people can remember 8 items. We can break it down. We can reduce theories into more manageable chunks and therefore create hypotheses which test specific chunks, which over time we can build up those theories into effective strategies, i.e. the work of Milgram, i.e. the work of Ash, of building up a gradual understanding, and that's very useful. However, the simple fact is they can miss the bigger picture. It does come back to things like Badley, he does miss the bigger picture with emotion. He doesn't cover it. He doesn't give information about that. And our theory for memory is inaccurate because of this. And we have to recognize that this is a problem. Okay? By recognizing this is a problem, we can then deal with it and work through there. But we have to first of all recognize that taking this reductionist approach ultimately leads to us becoming lost in the detail and failing to grasp where things truly come. And when we look at this, we see why Badley, when he was working originally on the working memory model, failed to pick up for 26 years. Years, that is, on the fact that in theory you can dance without the episodic buffer, and had to go back and add that in. He failed to consider the whole, and as such, this reductionist approach is always going to lead to gaps in our theories. We can also, I'll do one more example. When we look at relationships, we're going to look at a variety of different theories about the formation, maybe about the maintenance, but also particularly Duck's theory of breakdown. And one of the big issues with Duck's theory of breakdown is that while it offers us a great understanding of the process of breakdown, it doesn't actually say why. Now, he's got a separate theory in which he talks about the reasons for breakdown. He gives 3 different reasons for breakdown. But that should have been incorporated into one theory of breakdown. But then also that should be part of a holistic theory for relationships in which it covers formation, maintenance, and breakdown and renewal. And all of those things should be part of one big theory if we're to truly understand relationships. But instead, it's all broken down. And because of that, you only ever gain a partial understanding. Whereas taking the holistic approach would result in us fully understanding the area. So let's look at the levels of explanations now. So there's been a question on this before as well. So we've got some different elements here. So we're kind of moving on a little bit, but it is within there. So if we accept that there's different levels of explanations in psychology, then it can help us to overcome some of the issues of reductionism versus holism. Okay, so first of all, we've got what's called the psychological level of reductionism. So this is going to include the psychodynamic approach, it's going to include the cognitive approach, maybe a little bit of social learning theory on there, because remember, it kind of goes over both of our things there. So if we look at thought processes, i.e. OCD, we can explain it effectively as a series of irrational actions caused by faulty thought processes. That is how ultimately any cognitive one is going to break down. Any psychodynamic one is going to be based upon issues in the subconscious mind, probably partially stemming from either childhood trauma or failure to resolve your process accurately. So with OCD, particularly, we look at issues with failing to resolve the potty training successfully in the second stage of his psychosexual stages of development theory. So that tends to be seen particularly as problematic there, and that's why people develop OCD on there. There's an extra little explanation for OCD for you. Anyway, moving on, environmental stimulus response level. Okay, this is the level in which reductionism, such as behavior, so particularly learning theory, we're more talking about here. So we're talking about obviously a bit of classical and operant condition, really. I mean, basically, they reduce our understanding of human behavior to that of a stimulus from the environment and our learnt response to it. Meaning that we should look at the situation that people have to understand what has led them to develop issues such as OCD. So the idea being that OCD is a learnt response to the environment from which they've got that. I'm using OCD each time in order to be consistent, so you can kind of work it through here. Also, we then have the biological level of reductionism. It does this by breaking down into key physical biological components, looking at mechanisms of our brain, our body, and attributing cause to particular systems not functioning as planned or desired. So again, when we look at OCD, we see it coming from different levels within the biomedical approach, and particularly talking at in this case, serotonin and hypersensitivity in the basal ganglia. And that's the area of the brain which we tend to see being more active, overactive in the brain of people with OCD. And we believe, based upon these scans and based on these things, that it causes an unpleasant high level of stimulation, which leads to anxiety and which makes the person have to engage in different behaviors or different thought processes in order to enable them to cope with life, leading to the obsessive and compulsive behaviors that we see a sufferer of OCD experiencing. And that then we can realize that a antidepressant, by decreasing the level of that area, can decrease the issues. So that's me working it through. So the biological is putting it down to, fun enough, purely biological factors. The environmental is looking and saying it's a stimulus response based thing, and the psychological reductionism is saying it's to do with the reason of our thought processes, be it in a conscious or in a subconscious way. So there's a lovely little diagram now on the screen, which was provided by your example a little while ago. And they're doing this following a question in the exam where loads of people did really badly. So this is a great one to add in, to have in there on there. So the reductionist approach suggests that there are different levels of explanations. The lowest levels considers physiology or biology or biological explanations, where the behavior is explained in terms of neurochemicals, genes, and brain structure. The middle level considers the psychological explanations, e.g., the cognitive and behavioral. The highest level considers the social, cultural explanation. Now, that's really taking into account quite a lot of stuff. So at the very bottom, we see reductionism being present there. And that's the belief that human behavior can be explained by breaking down into simpler components. But we see the lowest level generally that we come across is the biological explanation. More complicated versions come from the cognitive and behavioral. That's seen as being slightly higher up in the levels of the explanations. And the highest one that we have is the social cultural, because there's lots of different factors involved in that. So they use the example of Bartlett's War of the Ghosts with his schema theory. there, that's a good old one. And he basically said that our culture that we're raised in shapes how our schemas are formed, and that will shape how we remember things. So he's saying that there's an interaction between the culture in which we come from and how we're raised and socialized and how we think and all those things there. So there's bringing together a variety of factors. If we drop down to psychological explanations of cognitive or behavioral environmental ones, we see that this is looking at things in a much simpler form than that. So we see people like Miller and Peterson with their studies there looking at what is the precise capacity, what is the precise duration, etc. And then biological, we look at things such as the biological component. So good old Maguire with his taxi study, which if you don't remember, that's the one where he showed a higher level of density of grey matter in the hippocampus for people who know or have the knowledge, which is a geographical mapping system for London for all the different roads and how to get round those things there. Okay, let's go on to next one. So again, this is the AQA resource which they pushed out following that one there. So that again, it's kind of saying just the same thing that we saw on the one before there. Okay, so the debate in context: is depression more effective in treating through the use of holistic or reductionist approach? What I do is I to research some treatments for depression, look at the holistic, and look also at the ones we've covered already. Which seems to be more effective? Spend a little bit of time doing that and reflect. Which do you feel is more effective? Okay, so either if you're in the lesson now, please feedback and discuss what it is you have done, or if you are working at home doing this, then please make note of that, and then you can feedback in the lesson on these things there. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to bring in good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because this is the quintessential example of a truly holistic theory. It's got physiological, it's got psychological, it's also got social aspects in that when we look at particularly esteem needs and psychosocial or all that part of that as we go up, and then it's got self-actualization at the top. It is one of the most quintessentially holistic theories. And if I was being asked to give an example of a holistic theory, it is my go-to theory. Okay. Many other theories we can cover and use examples of reductionism, but the best holistic theory we've got is very much Maslow's. But I want you to also consider something. How vague is it? Because it is vague, isn't it? You're looking at that stuff. There's not a lot of detail there. There's not a lot of depth there. And this is the problem with holistic theories. In order to be able to be useful, in order to be able to be pass onable, in order to have that ability to understand and get our heads around it, it ends up having to be quite vague. And that's a problem. The best example of a holistic theory in all of psychology is a theory which is undeniably, due to its holistic nature, overly vague, which has got to be seen as a fundamental problem with using this. Interactionist approach. What does it say? What does it mean for psychology? Being pragmatic, realistically, at times we need to use the reductionist approach in order to understand things. Yet at times there's also virtue to us using a holistic approach. There's virtue also to us using a combination of both. Interactionist approach. And so we can look at more depth at that different levels and break down the issues of esteem, with issues with understanding people's biological needs, understanding people's psychological needs, etc. And we can investigate that and build that. And by doing so, and doing it within that wider framework, we can come to understand and ultimately give better support and be more helpful for the entire community, by very simply coming to understand what it is that we need to do. Okay, so the interactions approach is actually probably the way we need to go in psychology. Okay, so let's look at a possible exam question. I've flagged up there the tutor to you resource. I also think I'm going to drop on here the Psych Boost resource as well. Tutor you one's got some great stuff there. But let's have a quick look at a exam paper, an exam question. Where has this come up before? Because it was a 16 marker a few years ago and people struggled. So let's have a look at this question. Okay, so there's different levels of explanation in psychology, ranging from reductionism to holism. Discuss levels of explanations in psychology. Refer to one or more topics in your answer. So this is requiring you to use examples from your topics, just like I asked you to do the nature nurture one. So we've got a variety of different content which is expected. So it talks about the different extremes. So extreme reductionism, so the lowest level one. So that's the one which I talked about right at the start. And we also got the holistic approach being covered in there. It also talks about the levels of explanations we've gone through, so breaking those down there. Talking about reductions of hierarchy and breaking it down to the different levels there, which I showed you. And actually, you can gain credit by drawing it as the diagram, that diagram that we showed you earlier. You can get marks for that. Okay, so this was in 2023 paper. Okay, so it's worthwhile wrapping your heads around this. We also have types of reductions in relation to the levels. So biological, psychological, machine reductionism on that thing, which is often leveled at the cognitive approach, sometimes unfairly, sometimes fairly. And machine reduction, particularly failing to pick up on the emotions, i.e., I don't know, how about the working memory model? Weird badly, yes, he is working on emotions because of the criticism being machine reduction. We're not machines. We can also use that to criticize, for instance, cognitive behavioral therapy. That can be used there because ultimately humans are not rational all the time, and cognitive behavioral therapy assumes we are logical beings, and we're not. Moving forward, we've then got also exemplifies levels, holism, highest level, going through explaining holism on there. That's the content they're expecting. That's the AO1 stuff. When we look at applications, so they've got some great examples here. We haven't covered schizophrenia yet, but we will be, and looking at these different ones. So you've got family dysfunction, expressed emotion. Those are ones there. So basic physiological level, so dopamine versus psychological, sort of psychosocial ones there. That's relevant. You also got cognitive processes in memory, so I've used that multiple times today. We also have obedience, again with Milgram, that was being used. I haven't mentioned gender simply because I didn't go around to it. We can look at XY, and psychological level. We don't do sex and gender, but it is a topic which is technically available. So that's probably coming from there. But as you can see, there's a lot of stuff which we're going to be covering if we've not covered already, which can be used there as applications that they're kind of recommending. Others, if you could think of them, came up with them, then they would be suitable too. But as you can see, the examples I've given you were the ones which also the example came up with. Possible points discussions, well, with loads. So for instance, basic units more appropriate, and hard science, which we like that things in physics. It might help in physics more than us. We can also look at the usefulness of treatments, developing drugs and all that sort of stuff, and helping that. We can discuss parsimony, the idea of using the simplest explanation in best, or it's able to be communicated, but don't know if it's best doing. We've also contrasted the higher holistic levels on those things there as well. So there's quite a lot of information there for us. So let's have a quick look at a model. So this is a model answer which was posed to us. I'm going to assume you're going to pause it rather than talking it through the entire way, but do have a read of this. Okay, so we can kind of see stuff which is going on there. That's the whole essay. I'm going to click through and we're going to look at different little bits on there. So this, first of all, I'm labeling up. This is the first part of it. We've got AO1 and AO2 nicely being identified there. And actually, this is one thing also in your exam scripts, if you request them back, this is the sort of thing you'll see. You see AO1, AO2 being picked up in there on marks. Exams will pick it up on there. I've used a bit of color coding just to make it easier. I've used the color coding I've always used with you guys. But examiners just tend to use AO1, AO2, AO3, picking from those points. A few other bits and pieces as well. But those are things that helps them to consider what mark they should give overall. So I flagged it up to you there. We're seeing the different content being covered. Here we see that they've moved on to cover AO3, and they've got those things there. They have lapsed into AO1 within the second part there. So they've become overly descriptive. Okay, and that's something which, if they thought they were giving AO3 at that point, then actually they're not. So I just want to draw your attention to that. Looking over on that left-hand side, right-hand side of the page, sorry, there is an AO1 point there, which shows you can, if you're not careful, slip in. So there you go. And they then carry on and they give some really great other examples and points there. Even with that slip that they make, even though they go on to kind of have a kind of problem to that, this answer is good enough. It's good enough in exam conditions, being written on a question that you have never seen before, and doing those things. This answer was recognized as being good enough by the examiner for full credit. Okay, so I think that's really powerful to know, because it's not perfect, but it's good. It's definitely good, and it's good enough to gain full credit. And I think that's really, really valuable for us. Okay, so I think that's the end of this presentation now. So hopefully you understand a bit more about the whole reductionism versus holism. Please do also check out the other connected videos, which I'm going to put in the comment section as well, and also go back through and look at this model essay for a debate 16 marker. Thank you very much, folks.